All right, folks, it's been a long time, and we are bringing the channel back. This is the first episode of the new and improved 60 RPM, coming at you in high def audio, otherwise known as we didn't have a camera to film this right now. I'm Nate.
I'm Joseph.
And today we're going to be talking about the new Kanye West album, Ye.
Or Ye.
Or Ye. And also, we're going to be debating a little bit about the content and the events leading up to the release of the album because, in my opinion, you can't really ignore that in the context of the record. So right off the bat, I'm just going to lead in with the fact that I'm still a little bit conflicted on the record, but for the most part, I'm feeling as though Kanye is starting to give us this portrait of a person I'm no longer interested in. Kanye has kind of gone down this rabbit hole where he continuously just wants to be more and more contrarian. And at this point, even if he is giving us an honest and a vivid picture of himself, I'm not necessarily interested because he doesn't seem to be the person he once was.
So let's talk about that. No video rather, so you can't see me holding up a notepad like I'm his therapist. Let's talk about you saying how he just is like trying to be contrarian because like I feel like with at least the first 3 tracks is where he's trying to be the most controversial. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously you get the whole intro with the "I thought about killing you today."
It's meant to arouse some people. Not arouse, you know what I mean. Arouse.
Strike up some feelings.
Arouse some disturbed souls.
No, but I think it was a more interesting track on the album, and I don't necessarily think the album as a whole is bad. I just think a lot of what he has to say doesn't really reach very deep, and considering this entire time he's just been going for this whole, we're free thinking and we need to think freely. It just doesn't seem like he's actually doing that. It seems like he's more interested in whatever society thinks they want, and then just trying to do the opposite. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to be able to let go of these societal norms.
So I get that, but also like that being contrarian and all that, I feel like that plays into the larger theme of the album, which we can both agree is being bipolar, you know?
See, I don't even know if it necessarily is.
Well, I mean, it's on the cover. Like,
That's true.
See, so the way I look at this album is that it's really all just like, I don't want to say a metaphor, but like a representation of like being bipolar, about like being in Kanye's like kind of headspace, you know? Like, so the first 3 songs are obviously like very like ugly. They're trying to like, be very contrarian, but that's all a part of like Kanye being Kanye because sometimes you can't control that stuff. Like even on Yikes, he talked about like sometimes scaring himself, like so. And that's what I like about the album is that it kind of like executes this concept of being bipolar, but it's also like optimistic about it. In some ways different than others. Like in Yikes, he's talking about how like, it's my superpower, that's like an angry kind of aggression. It gets more like beautiful and more like, optimistic, for lack of a better word, towards the end, kind of like uplifting, like, yeah, that's my point.
No, and I can see that as being sort of this picture of someone who's broken. And I mean, he mentions multiple times that he was also hooked on opioids and then came off. Mm-hmm. But it seems like the only person tearing down Kanye is Kanye. I mean, in like whatever the TMZ and the Charlemagne interview, he was talking about the fact that he got liposuction because he thought people were calling him fat. And I don't know if maybe I was out of the loop for whatever time that happened, but I didn't necessarily know anything about that. I didn't see any tabloids about him being fat, but I don't know. It just seems like he was so influenced in that moment by being part of what society wants, and then as soon as he got hooked on opioids and he's like, I'm guessing around that time he was diagnosed officially with bipolar disorder, all of a sudden now he's all about free thinking and about starting to fight back against this system. But it doesn't seem like he's doing that because he actually has thoughts about what the system, and it doesn't seem like he's thinking in depth about, I don't know, say what Trump is doing in office. He just wants to do it because through following the system, he got hurt through the opioids. But I think at the same time, he's not putting in any sort of thought in depth to what he's saying, like the slavery is a choice and endorsing Trump. It doesn't necessarily seem like he's focusing on the actual issues. He just wants to kind of go fuck society and run the other direction just because it got him hurt a little bit.
That it has kind of always been his brand, though. That George Bush doesn't care about black people, you know, like.
That's true.
Yeah. Before I make my actual point about this, I was gonna say you didn't see any headlines about him being fat because they were all about him being blonde.
And being a Trump Tower.
The classic bait and switch. But no. What was I saying about that? Oh no, I feel like this is almost Kanye's midlife crisis because, like you were saying, like first off, you know, he's at that age, and second off, you know, he was on opioids, and I remember him talking about like all his, you know, a lot of his heroes died from like being on the same drugs that he was. I think he was saying that on TMZ. So like he got like a look into death, and that scares a lot of people, you know, like especially someone as like unstable as him. Like it's hard to look at that and be like, oh shit, you know, that could have been me, you know, I could have been Michael, you know.
That's true, and I think I mean I guess I probably could look at that a little bit more in depth and kind of look at he's painting this portrait of someone who's like very broken, and it's kind of the system broke him, and now he's trying to push this idea of not falling in line with the system. It just seems like his methods are a little bit off-putting and not very well informed. As far as the actual music goes, I'm having some issues, especially with his lyricism on this album, sort of only scratching the surface. I mean, with like the Pusha T album that was also 7 minutes, right around 20 minutes, or 7 tracks, 20 minutes, it started to actually scratch the surface because, you know, Pusha was touching on some topics, but he wasn't necessarily trying to make grand statements. And meanwhile, in this Kanye album, it seems like he's trying to address everything from opioid addiction and racism to mental health and his family within such a short time span. I feel like he only ever scratches the surface, and when half of his bars are punchlines like "none of us would be here without cum," it just feels like
that's bad. I can't defend that. That's
I was gonna say,
like...
it's honestly, when I'm sitting in the kitchen and I play that song and stuff, like my other roommates are honest to God laughing because they never thought they'd hear that on a rap song delivered with so much passion. It's just the type of thing where I'm starting to wonder what this album would have looked like if he did give it a little bit more time. Because that's another thing. He said that he scrapped an entire album after that TMZ interview and pretty much built it back from the ground up. So I'm wondering, what would those bars be like if we actually got what he had written over a few years and was planning to put over something like... What was that first single that he dropped? The Scoopity Poop one.
Oh, Lift Yourself, yeah.
Lift Yourself. Pusha T mentioned in an interview that actually had real lyrics, but we're never going to get to see that because he decided to scrap it and focus on this immediate snapshot of what's going on in his life now and how he's feeling. But I feel like if it was a little bit more fleshed out and given a little bit more time to stew, he might actually come to some real conclusions on some of these topics.
So this is one of the big points I have right here. You can see in all caps. Kanye has always had cringy lyrics. If you don't think that If You Ain't No Punk, Holla We Want Prenup isn't cringy, like,
that's got a certain. I feel like that's got a certain camp to it, though.
A lot of this is camp. Especially, I thought like Violent Crimes had a lot of like campy lines to it. Like you know, it's like a very serious like parental anxiety, but he's kind of like being funny about this. Like, don't do yoga, don't do Pilates, stick to piano and karate. I thought that was like funny, but also like kind of like sweet in the same way, you know. But you know, I think like being last minute and being sort of zany, silly, off the wall has always kind of been in the Kanye brand. I read somewhere that Yeezus, like, he's like, you know, he finished that album 2 days before he, you know, released it. He finished Daytona 2 days before he released it. And that's the other thing. You said that Pusha T's lyrics were a lot more, like, insightful, and it's like, yeah, no shit, like it always has been, you know. He's always been the lyrical one, you know. Kanye's just been the more zonked out and I guess more radio friendly one, so that's why he's gotten more of the spotlight. But Pusha T has always had that like kind of consistent, like, he's got the gift of double entendres, I guess, is the best way to put it. But yeah, no, I have a full thing here for his defense of his cringy lines. So I left out the cum one for good reason, but
it's a little bit unexcusable.
Yeah, I think it excuses itself because it has that kind of cool like choir sample afterwards.
That's true. That's true.
But so the biggest one that I've seen is the Russell Simmons line. So I'm going to take a stab at defending that one, which I know is a slippery slope. But
Go
yeah,
for it.
all right. So let me start off by saying that I'm a feminist in all senses of the word. So I don't remember the exact words, but Kanye said something along the lines of like, Russell Simmons says that he's praying for me, and I'm praying for him because he got Me Too'd. And people are interpreting that as him kind of just like, brushing off the whole Me Too kind of debacle. Like, sorry, what?
I think the brushing off of the Me Too thing comes with the next line. What if that happened to me too? And then I'd be on E! News.
So that's the second part I was going to say. So the backstory of the whole Russell Simmons thing is after Russell Simmons' whole sexual allegations and all that, he said that he was praying for Kanye because they didn't know like what kind of headspace he was in. And Kanye there is basically was like, well, fuck you, you're a sexual predator, like. So I don't think that's too bad. And I guess what a lot of people are upset about is what if that happened to Me Too and that was E! News? Like, of course, but like, he's a narcissist. Like, we've all known this, and I'm sure like that's just a thought that crosses his head a lot. And it's not even that like did he sexually assault someone and is he worried that that'll like come up. It's more just like, what if I got in one of my bad moods and this happened. It kind of like shows how scared he is of his bipolarism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, just kind of shows like the hook on that song, Yikes, like sometimes I'm scared of myself. It shows how scared of himself that he can actually get, which I think is kind of it's almost a vulnerable moment when you think about it.
Yeah. And I think what really happened with this album a lot is we've been able to kind of, up until this point, look at all of Kanye's antics and assume he's got some sort of larger plan. Or he's doing this all because he's aware that it's just going to create buzz and that he's going to end up, at the end of the day, sort of benefiting off of all the hype. I mean, we had all the things that happened with the life of Pablo. And I mean, other than trying to claim Bill Cosby was innocent, he just sort of went off the wall personally, and it didn't seem like he was necessarily creating any sort of big social drama or any sort of he wasn't really necessarily saying anything that had serious social repercussions. What I'm kind of concerned with nowadays is with his endorsement of Trump and with all of these statements about racism and slavery being a choice and such, he's, honest to God, starting to use his platform not to bring up serious topics and to offer anything insightful or progressive. What he's instead doing is bringing it up for shock value. And I think taking something as serious as the opioid epidemic or something like slavery and chalking it up to, we weren't free thinking and why didn't we just try to get out of this, I think that seems a little bit disingenuous and just sort of saying something for the sake of getting clickbait instead of necessarily actually starting some free thinking like he's claiming he is. I think in this album we're starting to see a manic and unhinged Kanye that is acting this way not because he has some sort of plan or is going to benefit, but he's actually starting to come off the rails, and at the same time it seems like he's trying to cope with this love for his family and all of this sort of personal responsibility he feels he has while also being as wild as he is.
Yeah, I think I enjoy the album a lot more than him because I can more easily separate the album Kanye from the public figure Kanye, because obviously if you're listening to Ye, you're going to, or more than likely, you're going to know a lot about what Kanye's been saying in the news and what he's been, spewing and bullshit he's been saying. But at least he's smart enough with this album to make it easy enough where he can actually separate that, because like what a lot of people are mentioning is that there's no mention of Trump on the album. There's Stormy Daniels, but like he doesn't want the art, or he doesn't want what he's saying to take away from the art he's creating. Like he knows that those views were controversial and he knows that they upset a lot of people, and when he releases music, he from what I see at least, he wants it to kind of like, he doesn't want this to upset people. He wants, to create it for the widest audience possible. I don't know if he still wants to be pop or whatever, but with his art, he wants it to not upset people. That he wants people to be like shocked, I would say, at some points, but he wants people to enjoy it more than anything. And I think that he knows that mentioning Trump or mentioning he mentioned slavery was a choice, but then he in a couple verses later he said that he would like never say that again, right?
I don't think that actually happened. No, I don't think he mentions that he wouldn't say it again.
It was
if anything, I think he's
genius.
fueling off of this sort of rage that people have, where now he's mentioning these controversies like he's actually getting people to talk, and like he's actually starting to get people to think, because what does he mention? How are we going to build it? I said, how Sway, referencing that really old interview where he just went off on Sway in the Morning. And then he mentions the slavery line. And I mean, I totally believe that he started to reevaluate things after the TMZ interview. See, but I feel like he's honestly fueling off of that sort of circus that's going on, and sort of mentioning not necessarily Trump, but he definitely is mentioning his controversy and sort of fueling off of this public persona that everybody has perceived him as. Because we know he thinks he's a genius. We know that he holds himself in high regard. And of course, he's making art all about himself. It's not like he wants us to separate what he's doing in his daily life and in the public sphere, and he wants us to separate that from the music. If anything, I think that is entirely sort of creating the music. If anything, the music is almost a reaction to what he's said in public. And I think at this point, he's sort of crediting himself with starting conversations, because what was the one line? He said, I said slavery was a choice. They said, how, yay? Mm-hmm. He thinks that people are coming to him for answers still. And he still believes that he's got some good points about this, and that he's really making people think, when in fact, I think more than anything, he's making people think, God, this guy's a fucking nut job.
So that line that I was talking about, it came in the next verse. It's, even if publicly I lack the empathy, I ain't finna talk about it another 4 centuries. I feel so white right now. Yeah, no, like, it's not an apology, but I think he's becoming more aware, or at least with the latest press cycle, he became more aware that like what he said has, consequences, especially after just, like the whole point of that song, after his wife called him and was crying and couldn't breathe, But I feel like that's a normal Kardashian reaction,
Honestly, but I do.
The mangoes weren't in the fruit platter.
No, but honestly, I will give him credit. I think that his reflections on how his actions affect his family are probably the most informed on the entire album. I mean, he seems grounded in really understanding the repercussions of kind of what he's saying, talking about his wife being angry and being upset about him, thinking that they're going to lose it all because he literally can't seem to keep his mouth shut. And he even mentions that he gave her the option to leave. And I know there's been a lot of rumors or whatever about Kim Kardashian wanting a divorce or something like that, but I think that seems to be the real moment of truth on the album, is when he starts to reflect on his family. And I think if we would have gotten a little bit more of that, we could have gotten something like a Jay-Z 444, where it feels like a grown man album. I mean, Kanye is a grown-ass man at this point, and he needs to start kind of thinking about his actions and how they affect not only him, but his family. And he's thinking about, on the last track, especially his daughter. And I mean, a lot of it comes off as anxious and a little bit overprotective, but at the core of it, it's all about his concern for, he knows how fucked up he is. What are the other people out there gonna do? And I think that that's a really honest point, and that starts to show that there is some serious humanity in what Kanye is saying, but it just doesn't seem to come through on a majority of his songs. I mean, not a track before he was talking about his wife. He's talking about fucking bitches, and about how he could have all these women, and how every girl ever would drop the drop of a dime would just run over to get to Ye.
But yeah, that's the bipolar part of the album. Like, just the fact that when he switches from track 3, which is like that, like, I only fuck with basic bitches and yada 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 and whatever, and then it goes straight to that 4, 5, 6, 7 run. It just kind of shows like where his headspace can go, and like how he can just do a complete 180 to like this headspace that I'm sure he would want to be in a lot more often. Like because that like even just like seeing like the first 3 tracks are very very ugly, the last 4 tracks are very beautiful. It seems that he's more concerned with the beautiful. He wants to see the beautiful more often, but he just can't because of whatever mental illness or superpower he may have.
Yeah. Honestly, at times it seems more like freaking schizophrenia with how just polar opposites these things are. I know that, like, with bipolar disorder, there are a lot of mood swings, and it's all about kind of these different contrasts. But at the same time, it almost seems like he's just 2 different people living within the same person. And that's kind of the core of what makes this album hard to digest, at least for me, is this idea that he just so often wants to be there for his family and so much wants to be a better husband and be a good dad. And even in that song, Violent Crimes, he alludes to violence, and I don't know whether or not he's referring to it in general and him being scared of it for his children, or if he's thinking that he might be violent towards his children, is almost how it comes off.
I didn't get that at all.
No?
No, I got he would be violent towards the men that would try to engage in relations with his daughter. Just because because the whole point of that song is that like he knows what it's like to objectify women because he was that until he had daughters, and he knows that he knows these people now and what they're thinking and what they will be thinking about his daughters, and that the violent crimes is what he's gonna do to these people if they like disrespect, or that what he would want to do to these people they disrespect his flesh and blood. So no, I think that's a very sweet song. I honestly think it's might be my favorite on the album, even though like the instrumental is kind of a little bland, but I think like the sentiment of it is actually like very sweet, very silly, but just kind of like it's Kanye. It's that I feel like would belong on Kanye's Grown Man album. Like I don't see anything in that doesn't say like I'm crazy. If that like he released one song and it was that, I'd be like, oh, this guy cares about his daughters. He might be a little bit cuckoo, but he's a family man in heart. And on what you're saying about the Grown Man album, I'm still holding out hope that we get that from Kanye one day, but he's nowhere near that level right now. Like he can't handle celebrity. He's never been able to handle celebrity, but who knows, maybe these trips out to Jackson Hole will like change him or something like that. And I think like best case scenario of this album, when we look back at Kanye in like 30 years, this will be the album. It's like, oh man, he was really crazy back then, wasn't he? Like, yeah.
I'm a little bit interested to see if we do get a mellowed out Kanye, or if at this point it seems like he's embracing this sort of polar opposite personality that he has, and I'm wondering if we're going to get someone even crazier next album, or if he's going to somehow bring it down a notch. Because at this point, it seems like sonically, he's sort of doing things where he's referencing the past, still trying to bring in more experimental aspects, at least with the production. And then as far as the lyrics go, it's this entire dichotomy of, do I want to be a family man, or am I too fucked up to ever feel that way? I mean, a good example that we haven't even mentioned yet is Ghost Town, where I mean, he's not necessarily singing these lyrics, but there's points in the song where it's talking about he just wants these people to love him, but every time he does, it just pushes them further away. On that hook, that was, I don't know how I feel about the Kid Cudi singing. I mean, it's definitely no humming.
It's it's rough around the edges, but I think it kind of lends itself to the song.
Yeah, and then the outro about putting your hand on the stove just to see if you still bleed and feeling kind of free. I mean, you really see how even in something as domestic as your kitchen, he's still having these moments of breakage. And I'm starting to wonder if that sort of Kanye where he can't help but feel numb is going to go away, or if that's just going to continue to grow stronger. In this case, I'm wondering about how it's going to affect his personal life in the future, and whether or not he's going to continue being sort of this hip-hop hero or if it's just his tendencies are going to take him into being the villain. Because I feel like right now he's almost playing the role of an anti-hero. You hate him so much because of whatever he says in the news, but then when he releases this album, you start to see these underlying themes of love and really wanting the best for people, and you start to wonder how he can exist both times there in both places, and it starts to just really become this dichotomy that I don't know if I'm here for. But I think that's kind of the point, is sort of creating these conflicted emotions.
So I think that's the point of the video here, is that Nate is ableist and can't handle people with bipolar disorder.
Let's calm the fuck down. It's definitely not what's going on here.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make a quick transition. I think we've been talking about Kanye the person too much, and I want to talk about the music a bit more, because that, I feel, is Kanye for a while now has not been the strongest part of a Kanye album.
That's for sure. I mean, with all the collaborators, and then, I mean, I don't know what happened. It just seems like after My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, the lyrics, after he did that 48 hours before the release experiment, it just seems like it kind of has been going downhill, and there's just been a lot more punchlines that make me go, ooh.
I stand by, he's an amazing curator, and I would love to see him go down the Dr. Dre route at some point, maybe even hopefully next album or something like that. But like what he did with like, you know, Life of Pablo, Ultra Light Beam, this album, Ghost Town, you know, he's able to curate these like beautiful emotions, and sometimes even bangers too. He's gotten less good at the bangers, I would say, but no, if he can just go on like just full collaborator mode, popping up for a verse every once in a while if he deems fit, although he could deem fit like some stupid shit. So I don't know. Like I don't know. He's gonna do whatever he wants, but if he could just like curate people, that would be my dream Kanye. But yeah, let's talk about I think the beats on I can't really find a flaw in the beats in any of the songs here, besides maybe Violent Crimes being a bit too bland. But I think that's like, it lends itself to the song. So
I think what we're kind of getting here is something that I haven't seen Kanye do before, and that's sort of doubling back on ground he's covered.
Yep, I was going to say that, yeah.
There's a lot of things here that remind me, I know a lot of people were referencing My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, but I almost feel kind of like it seems more like a sister album to Yeezus, with the brevity and some of the synth tones that he's working with. I think if Yeezus had a few more samples and it wasn't trying to be so maximalist, this is the album we would get. And
I kind of think that's what Life of Pablo was. I was gonna say that if you told me these were Life of Pablo B-sides, I like would believe you. You know, like there's nothing that really like. So Life of Pablo, I think it was kind of signaled by like being a mixed bag. Like, you know, like Yeezus was maximalist, 808s and Heartbreaks was, you know, auto-tune, crooning, and all that. Like, Life of Pablo was just a mixed bag, and that was, you know, a different side to Kanye we haven't seen, I guess. This one is, again, just another mixed bag. You have the beautiful songs, you have the kind of, like, weird, almost bangers, but really, like, the sound that he creates here doesn't really change much from Life of Pablo, and that's my biggest complaint on the album.
I think that the Life of Pablo production, though, was so scattershot, and I mean, I feel like albums like even just the new A$AP Rocky album, Testing, were really inspired by kind of what I like to refer to as the sketchbook album, that I feel like Life of Pablo was. It was a playground for a lot of different ideas, and although it didn't feel cohesive necessarily as a full project, I feel like it had a lot of sort of flashes in the pan. And what I like about this album is he takes a lot of those best ideas off of the Life of Pablo, and in my opinion, off of some of the things on Yeezus, and sort of applies them with the same sort of grandiose sample treatment that My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy had, where we're getting some samples interjected, and then also some of these odder and more off-the-wall synth tones. I mean, let's not ignore the fact that there are a lot of even just video game noises on the outro of Ghost Town. And then also with something like Wouldn't Change. Is that what it is? Is that the...
Wouldn't Leave.
Wouldn't Leave, and then the last song, Violent Crimes. I feel like we're almost getting a throwback to honestly some golden era Ye with College Dropout and Late Registration. I think we're seeing a lot more soulful samples and some sort of more straightforward melodies that we would not necessarily say are boring, but they're much more traditional, which feels a lot more like those early albums. I think this is kind of him reconnecting with that little bit of, I mean, maybe serenity that he got from those albums. He talked a little bit in a short interview I saw at the listening party where he said he needed that peace and quiet, like he went to Hawaii for My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And I think having that isolation and really letting those sounds mingle and echo with him were a great idea. And honestly, the production's probably my favorite part of this album.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, yeah. So I have one more point on here I wanted to get at. Do you feel that this album is low effort? That's a word I've been seeing thrown around a lot recently.
I think people are interpreting it as low effort because of something like the runtime or the not nearly as, I guess, huge statements or instrumentals. I mean, nothing here breaks what, like, I think there's a 4.5-minute track.
Yeah, I think the first song in Ghost Town are the two longest. Yeah.
And let's not forget, I mean, he had a 9-minute track on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. He's no stranger to songs that kind of overstay their welcome. Mm-hmm. And I think, honestly, here it almost feels like some of the songs aren't fleshed out enough. But I think that's more born out of the rapid fire way that this album was put together and sort of the brief track listing, which I don't know exactly why he's got such a fixation on the number 7, but I mean, it makes for a really easy listen. I mean, I listened to this freaking thing 4 times within the first 12 hours it was released.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that brevity, I told you this already, brevity like lends itself to Kanye so much. I'd much rather have a Kanye song that's like not fleshed out enough, because he can go way overboard, a la 30 Hours, a la the last 3 minutes of Runaway, which I love, is a great song, but you know, I'm not gonna listen to the last 3 minutes all the time.
I'm just glad that the only Chris Rock skit was at the listening party and not actually on the album.
Yeah, but no, I think I like this version of Kanye that is doing 2 to 4, maybe 5-minute songs, and just makes it as long or short as they deem fit, I guess. Like, it seems like they're almost like imposing like a limit on themselves. I guess, well, yeah, they are, because of like, the deadlines and all that. But it almost seems like they're imposing a limit on the times of the tracks too, which I think worked really well for Daytona. I think because My Name Is My Name, like, great album, but there's definitely like, you could lose a few verses or something and it would be like, maybe a more condensed album. But no, just the fact that he's condensing these albums to the best of the best of the best. And the point I was trying to make about the low effort is that, like, people are saying, oh, like, he finished the album like a day before, or like, I think they finished Ghost Town on the same day of the listening party on Friday. But I mean, like, that doesn't matter, because it only matters what comes out, like, and second off, like, he does more than what comes out, like. It takes a certain ear, is what I'm trying to say, to try to pick out like those magic moments. So maybe he's making like 21 songs and he's only picking these 7. Like you said, he might have a fascination with 7, but like, it doesn't matter how low or high effort these instrumentals seem. Like, especially I was gonna say Comeback Baby from Daytona. Like, it's a very like skeletal, nothing much really happens to the instrumental, but just that bass line itself, there's something like magic about it. Do you feel like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on about like that Pusha T album, but I really think what happened with this album is Kanye gave himself a time limit and really made himself stick to it this time, which I believe sort of ended up in this album that maybe interpreted as low effort, but really is just an exercise in a little bit of brevity and sort of trying to say what you want to and what you mean to say directly, because there's no room for error. I mean, Life of Pablo, when he released that original track listing, it was only 10 songs long. And if you guys remember, the people complaining about maybe how late it took him to get this album ready, have you listened to Wolves lately on any streaming service? Because I'll tell you what, if you listen to the one that's on a streaming service instead of the leaked version you downloaded into your iTunes, he added a shitload of stuff to even that song. Mm-hmm. The Life of Pablo wasn't done until, I think, 3 months after he actually released it onto some platforms. And I think that that album sort of ended up suffering, and the final product isn't often as recognized as it should be because he didn't finish it when it was actually released. And with this album, he forced himself to finish it. So I'm sure there are some changes that he might have made had he gotten those extra 3 months, but I don't think that having those extra 3 months would necessarily cause the instrumentals, at least, to get better. I think at that point I would have liked to see a little bit more attention paid to the lyrics, but I mean, that's just more about the fact that it's a snapshot of this exact moment in time, not the last few years.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. This album is a snapshot for Kanye of his current mental state, and that's what he wanted it to be. He wanted it to be like the sounds in his head put onto album form, and the dichotomy of himself. That's $1 million word right there. Oh,
the dichotomy.
I was also going to mention, do you when you listen to Life of Pablo, do you sometimes like get surprised by Saint Pablo? Because I keep forgetting about it.
I can't forget about Saint Pablo because of that Sampha track.
Okay, ooh. No, it's a great song, but like, because for the longest time I didn't have Spotify, so I just downloaded the original version, and now when I listen to it on Spotify, I'm like, what's this new Kanye song? Ooh.
Exactly. All right, so to wrap this up, Joseph, do you have any final thoughts, any kind of overarching theme? What's your overall impression?
I think, honestly, I would much rather listen to this Kanye album, front to back, than any of his other albums he's released in the past decade, honestly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even My Beautiful Dark Twisted?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a hefty listen, you know? I like, in terms of pure listenability, I think it's the best album he's done in a decade. I'm not saying it's the best album, you know, but like, this is the album I would come back to, is what I'm trying to say. I would think My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is a better album. Maybe Life of Pablo is a better album. I don't think Jesus is a better album. Yeah, but I don't know. I really liked what he did here, and I'm looking forward to see what's coming out the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's true. Honestly, I'm just waiting for that Kid Cudi project because Ghost Town is probably the best song on this album. Mm-hmm. Overall, I'd probably have to say that this is a really kind of conflicted listen for me, and I don't really know how it's going to rub me in the future. I think as we as these events fade into the past, we might end up looking back more fondly on this album, but at the moment, I'm not necessarily enamored with it. Although I do have to admire the production and sort of what he might have been going for with some of the more personal tracks as far as his family goes. But I think for me, it's a few more misses than hits.
All right. Well, agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree.
Good sport,
yeah, absolutely.
That's the sound of us shaking hands.
Well, thank you for listening in. We're going to be coming out with these periodically whenever we feel moved by a certain topic or release. And thank you for listening in. This has been the 60 RPM podcast.